distributed yet. Every single thing we need to do to tackle climate change, technologically, economically, already exists. Scientifically, it already exists. The barriers we have are political, social and cultural. And that's going to be the main focus of my presentation this evening. Just to give you context from the panel debate earlier, I'm actually a former marine biologist. I worked as a fisheries biologist before I got into media and storytelling. And the reason for that was because I realised as a fisheries biologist, I was going to spend my whole life saying if you don't stop catching all the fish, there won't be any fish. And so it wasn't the science that was the problem, it was the message. And 15 years ago, I founded, or co-founded, a company called Futerra. We are a kind of global sustainability communications agency, offices in London, New York, Stockholm, San Francisco, and now Mexico. Our mission has always been to make sustainability so desirable it becomes normal. And that's through the idea that people will run towards positive, attainable, aspirational visions of a compelling future with more energy and stamina than they will run away from threats of doom and gloom and Armageddon. And our proposition is imagine better. If you want to change the world, first you've got to imagine a better one. You have to stretch people's imagination. You have to push them. You have to bust them out of the status quo. You have to take them somewhere different. I can paraphrase that in a fancy way from our scientific language, saying if you want to subvert the dominant paradigm, we need to have more fun than they are and let them know while we're doing it. So this is all about living the experience. This is my team on company away days, on fancy dress night. This is obviously not the way we go in front of our clients. But tonight my main focus is storytelling. Because dogs sniff bottoms, we tell stories. Now, stories are the way that we make sense of the world. They're the way that we understand our relationships with each other and the way we understand our relationship with the wider planet. They're absolutely fundamental. As the author of His Dark Materials, Philip Pullman, said, he goes, after nourishment, shelter and companionship, stories are the things we need most in the world. They are the library of humanity. They are the most powerful organising framework we have ever developed. They beat data hands down. I hate to say it to the scientists, but stories work. Stories are powerful. And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will see that people go from the physiological and the safety needs, the security needs, up through these ideas around self-identity to self-actualization before you sublimate off the top of the triangle to become the Buddha. And of course we know now that that's all underpinned by Wi-Fi. And we can't do anything without a kind of online internet connection. But stories are important. We have been telling each other stories for 75,000 years, since we sat around those first campfires. Sharing ideas, sharing beliefs, sharing perceptions. And stories tell us about where we are. You know, we're all, as environmentalists or people with environmental affections, familiar with this image, Earthrise, 1968, the first image of the Earth from the surface of another celestial body, the Moon. This is another one which is taken in 2004, so about 11 years ago. This is from the surface of Mars. So this is the first photo of the Earth from the surface of another planet in the solar system. And what does that tell us about where we are? It tells us we're in a tight spot. It tells us we're in a tight spot. Have you seen Oh Brother Where Art Thou? George Clooney says, we're in a tight spot. And we know we're in a tight spot. You know, you guys, I don't need to tell you guys this, but, you know, this is the great acceleration. And this graph, or this series of graphs, always makes people sit up. Because what you realise, it doesn't matter which trend you are looking at, whether it's a socio-economic trend or an Earth system trend, everything goes pear-shaped around about 1950. Which means we had trashed paradise in 65 short years. And rather that be depressing and demotivating, we are now, thanks to our scientific insight, able to understand what we are doing to our home. And that is empowering, and that is inspiring, because if we are able to understand what we're doing, we have a chance to fix it. And that's why it's powerful. And we've talked about this, a couple of people have mentioned the Holocene today in our discussions. You know, we've gone through a period of very volatile climate fluctuation. You know, at some points on this graph, there are probably only 3,500 human beings left on the planet. We've already been to the edge, and we came back. And the last 10,000 years are very interesting, because obviously that's where most of our modern civilizations have emerged, the beginning of agriculture. But really, this is where we are now. We're in the Anthropocene. You know, this is not about arrogant God complex. This is not about dominion over all. This is about us being the driving force of the fate of life on Earth and the fate of our own lives. And we know that this is difficult. We are trying to deal with amazing complexity now. Even the Pentagon talks about this as a VUCA word: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. When the Pentagon is writing reports about climate change, you know this shit just got real. You know, I mean, you can ignore what's happening in the American Senate, but the Pentagon is doing scenario planning. They know what is going on. And I will run through these quickly, but you guys don't need reminding. We lost 50% of our vertebrate biomass in the last 40 years. We're going to go the way of these guys. With 50% of our vertebrate biomass, you know, within our lifetimes, we've removed that from the biosphere. We're heading towards 10 billion. We're wasting our food. Nearly 50% of it never reaches a human stomach. We actually produce 4 billion tons of food a year, enough to feed 9 or 10 billion people, and half of that gets wasted. And that half of wasted food means that we trash the nature that provides the land that gives us that food. So we're not operating very smartly in the moment, and you guys all know about climate change. You know, we're on course probably for 3 or 4 degrees, depending on what happens in Paris next month, but probably 3 degrees optimistically. And at the moment, our response is like turning up to an earthquake with a dustpan and brush. And this is all compounded. This does get happier, by the way. It's compounded by this desert of the real, the fact that we can see plenty around us. We're in the urbanising century. There's more human beings who live in cities now than at any time in history, and as a result of that, we're disconnected from the fundamental life support systems of the planet. But we don't understand actually where our food and energy and water is coming from. Plus, you know, when you look at life satisfaction, in the developed West, whilst consumer spending and gross domestic product, the kind of crazy way we measure quality of life, have increased since the 70s, our life satisfaction has plateaued completely. So you have to ask yourself, if this is what is chewing through the planet, and it's not making us any happier, why the hell are we doing it? And it doesn't help when that overarching narrative is to get out there and shop, damn it shop, or to put it slightly more colloquially, buy more shit or we're all fucked. And as they say in the film Fight Club, this is like we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like, who largely don't care. You know, if there's ever an encapsulation of modern consumerist society, this story is failing. This is a story which has worked till now, but is unravelling before our very eyes because ultimately it has no meaning. And you know, it doesn't help when you have kind of corporate communications like this. It's my personal favourite ever from Tesco, you know, giant UK supermarket. Buy a low energy light bulb and win air miles. Because ever a kind of classic example of cognitive dissonance of where people are getting confused. So it's no wonder that the public get befuddled. You know, they don't know what's going on. They know that there's lots of things they should be worried about, but we're creatures of space and time. We worry about what is close, temporally and spatially. Psychologists refer to the fog of concern and the finite pool of worry. I just can't take on any more worry because I'm worried about my job, my security, my family, all of those kind of things, which means we end up in this state of denial. And denial is really attractive. You know, we know, I'm sure we've all engaged with the psychology of denial, but there's 3 key elements of it because historically we've been really good at denial. There's disavowal. Now, the denial of death is one that we live with every single day. But disavowal, you know, that this is not my fault. We have projection. This is someone else's fault. It's China's fault. It's India's fault. Or we have regression, where you say, this is so big, ugly and scary, someone else must be fixing it for me, right? And climate change hits all of these buttons of denial. And in a way, we kind of find ourselves as scientists who are in kind of control of the information or understanding the reality, like the scene in The Matrix. You know, when Morpheus says to Neo, do you want to take the red pill or the blue? You know, where the blue pill represents continuing to live in the blissful ignorance of illusion, hoping this will all go away, and the red represents the painful truth of a new reality, and an opportunity. Because in that new reality, in that painful reality, lies opportunity. Because we need to get beyond the denial. Hands up who flew here. Come on, confess. Not bad. Okay, so I came by train. I'm a mentalist. But it's really interesting how we have, and we talked about this today, one of the things that you guys need to look at is virtual conferencing. We need to lead by example. Classic story about scientists involved in climate change and environmental campaigning from Maya Hellman, an activist in the UK. He said he was around at a dinner party, surrounded by environmental campaigners, and everyone was talking about their holidays and where they were flying to next. And Maya, if you've ever met him, pointed out, he goes, well, that's a bit hypocritical. You know, we've all spent most of our careers working on carbon emissions and climate change, and we're all talking about where we're flying off to next. And he said there was this huge silence. And then someone said, isn't this a delicious spinach tart? No one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to kind of broach the subject, because it feels like the only way we get out of this is by sort of killing ourselves, that sort of hair shirt environmentalism. The environmental architect tells a lovely joke, Michael Pauling tells a lovely joke about two planets walking along through space. One starts itching and scratching and looking really uncomfortable, and the first one says, what's wrong? And the second one says, I've got a terrible case of Homo sapiens. And the first one says, don't worry, be gone soon. And I think from a public perspective, one of the reasons that we don't get the kind of the public support for the science which is compelling now is because the solutions which are being sold to them feel like an extension of the status quo. So if you look at energy, you know, we are like the old lady who swallowed a fly and swallowed the spider to catch the fly, and the bird to catch the spider, and the cat to catch the bird. That's why we're fracking, that's why we're in tar sands, that's why we're in deep water exploration, when we know most of this stuff has to stay in the ground. You know, that's the madness which actually alienates public opinion. And if we leave this to the market, it's going to be terrifying. As Avery Lovrins from the Rocky Mountain Institute says, the market makes a good servant, a bad master, a terrifying god. This needs to be a grassroots transition and coming down from the top down as well. It needs both. We need to energize ourselves around a new way of thinking. And I think Naomi Klein is right. I mean, her book is a bit shrill, but what she's basically arguing is correct, that actually there is an opportunity here, and there is an opportunity within our lifetime for us all to do well on one planet. But we have to understand how to share the insights, and, you know, this is not about a choice between, you know, fixing the economy and fixing the environment. If you think you can't do both at the same time, then you have a very tiny mind. This is the most exciting, dynamic, innovative game in town. And a lot of people say, well, you know, that sounds anti-progress. You know, but we think of progress as a linear thing. We think that it always gets better, that it goes in one direction, that each generation lives better than the generation that came before it. And what we fail to realise is that actually progress goes back and forth. It peaks and troughs, it ebbs and flows. It's not necessarily one directional. In actual fact, we're very good at creating progress traps. It's quite an appropriate setting for this slide. But the progress traps, it's like, climate change is a classic progress trap, because our pursuit of cheap, available, abundant energy in the form of fossil fuels has been amazing. Let's just agree that the world we have built around us by having access to those billions of years of fossilized sunshine is incredible. But we have to draw a line under that, because our continued pursuit of progress through that cheap, available, abundant energy, which is creating the carbon emissions which are causing climate change, is undermining our potential for future progress. So celebrate the past, don't blame the past, but we have to turn and look to a very different future. And that's the exciting part, and that's where the opportunity comes from. So, as the environmentalist John Muir said, you know, we're not blindly opposed to progress, but we are opposed to blind progress. You know, and our progress, if not blind, is at least partially sighted, or someone's given it a good poke in the eye. And there's three laws I'm going to share with you, which I think are causes for optimism about where we're going right now, some of which you'll be familiar with. Metcalfe's law. So Metcalfe's law says the value of telecommunications network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users of the system. We are in, and I think this is a happy coincidence, that we're in an era of extraordinary connection of humanity. So on the left there you have a map of the internet, and on the right you have a map of the connections in the human brain. There are, around about now, we have about 2.5 billion people online. By 2020 we'll have about 5 billion people online. By 2025, everyone will be online. That's an amazing moment in time. For the first time in 100,000 years of modern human history, we will be connected. You know, we will have a chance to actually understand and generate and craft a common narrative, which in difficult times we find ourselves in now feels ridiculous, because the internet will not just be this. The internet will not just be populated by selfies. I'm confident of this. I think there's a maturation and maturity that will come through, that we will realise that this amazing tool that we have can be used in ways rather than just sharing images of ourselves. Example from the UK, Good Energy, one of the biggest renewable energy providers, an open utility who are developing digital platforms, have developed a thing called Pickload, which is a live, fluid energy market, where you'll be able to choose where your electricity comes from. So you'll be able to actively choose to buy your electricity from the photovoltaic panels on your local school. This is real-time fluidity, so we can actually actively choose the future we want. These type of platforms will be transformative. Moore's Law. This is the one we probably all know about. Overall processing power for computers will double every 2 years, and has done consistently. And now we're starting to see something similar with batteries, where we get the kind of battery power doubling every 2 years as well. Because data is amazing if we use it correctly. The insight it gives us in order to run our world more efficiently and effectively is transformative. Company I'm involved with back home, Demand Logic, doesn't even need a new building energy management system. You know, you stick an analytical box on the existing system, it reads the data in a more nuanced and insightful way, and generates huge savings. One institution in London, there we go, it's King's College, £400,000 worth of energy savings in 1 year. This thing doesn't pay for itself in months, it pays for itself in weeks. You know, this type of insight is going to change things. And the one that we all know about is Swanson's Law, which has been going since the 70s, but the price of solar photovoltaic modules tends to drop 20% for every doubling of cumulative ship volume. That sounds like an IPCC report. What it means is the price of solar panels halves every 3 or 4 years. And so we're starting to see grid parity on solar in all sorts of different markets. That's amazing, because that means power to, by and for the people. That means electricity companies are going to start to be looking at their customers becoming their competitors. You know, it's not just about a disruption to the business model, it's a total erosion of it. And it's going to be intriguing. And then, of course, we have the big heroes. I mean, I'm not always a huge fan of the massive visionaries, but I think Elon Musk and what he's doing with Tesla is a visionary. You know, because electrification of vehicles is not the kind of panacea. I used to work at London Transport back in the day, and I always used to say, even if we drive clean, quiet electric cars, we'll still be stuck in clean, quiet traffic jams. You know, there has to be something different done in cities if we're going to have enlightened mobility. And the final law is Godwin's law, which says if an online discussion, regardless of topic, goes on long enough, sooner or later someone will compare someone or something to Hitler or the Nazis. I'm sure we've all been there in an online debate where we're accused of those kind of things. But really, what I think is a fundamental shift that is occurring is tackling the illusion of separation. It's the greatest illusion in the world, the fact that we are separate from each other and we are separate from the world that supports us. You know, it causes us to think in utilitarian and exploitative ways. You know, the resources of the world and other people are not resources, they're family. They're part of the interconnected web of life. And that's where the realization has to come from. There's a wonderful story, because this should be obvious to us. Should be fundamentally obvious with our amazing consciousness. The story by the American writer David Foster Wallace, who tells a story about two goldfish swimming along. The two goldfish bump into an old goldfish, and the old goldfish says, "All right, boys, how's the water?" And the two young goldfish look confused and carry on swimming. And one of them turns around to him and says, "What the hell is water?" And the point that David Foster Wallace is making is that this is in front of us every single day. You know, our fundamental interconnectedness and lack of separation from everything around us should be front of mind. And it's only through cultural narratives which we have separated ourselves. You know, it's perfectly possible to rebuild these bridges. And it's going to require changes. I don't want anyone ever to use the word consumer again. Consumer, when we frame people as consumers, we make them selfish, self-interested, passive, individualistic, and interested in their own rights. It's really powerful, and it makes us unpleasant people. What we need to be thinking of ourselves again is as citizens. And when you frame people as citizens, they become active, collaborative, responsibility orientated, trying to wonder what they can do for each other. This simple frame has to change. We are all global citizens, not individualistic consumers. And some of the things that could happen incredibly quickly. The wonderful, marvellous thing about the future is that it hasn't happened yet, and so we have an influence over it. I've been doing a lot of work on diet lately, and there's an incredible serendipity because the diet that is better for us is also better for the planet. So put fewer lives on your plate and put more years on your life. And we can all become environmental activists 3 times a day because every mouthful you take shapes the world around you. And this requires no major investment in infrastructure. It can start tomorrow. So if you're not vegetarian, or at least flexitarian, and you're working in climate science, it's time to change, people. It's time to change. It's an awkward truth. We have to look each other in the eye. We can't take ourselves seriously about our own work unless we can acknowledge that the fact that global livestock agriculture generates more carbon emissions than all of transport combined. These are killer facts that we need to acknowledge and internalise. But I'm going to finish on a big positive note. We need the vision. We need the vision of where we're going. We need the scenarios which paint a better picture for us, because there's nothing like a dream to create the future. At Futerra, we talk about this as a sizzle, which is all about the positive, compelling vision of the future we could have. And it's borrowed from an American hot dog salesman called Elmer Wheeler, who said, if you want to sell the sausage, you don't sell the sausage itself, you sell the sizzle. You sell the anticipation, the smell, the sound of it cooking on the grill, because if not, you're selling a dead pig. And on climate futures, we're often selling a dead pig. We're not selling the buzz, the excitement, the transition. That's what a dead pig looks like, in case you've forgotten. And there's amazing examples of this already. Who's been to or heard of Güssing in Austria? There we go, fantastic. You should have done. You're working in climate science, one of the first towns in the world to go entirely self-sufficient on renewable energy. All led by one visionary man who saw this happening and started the process 20 years ago. It's an amazing story, go and find out about it. But I'll finish on a note around my book, because I'm weird, I gave up flying on holiday over a decade ago, 11 years ago now, because of climate change. And 7 years ago I went all the way around the world without flying, trying to prove a point. I'm sort of stubborn like that. And I wrote this book, Only Planet. But what was the extraordinary thing about going around the world without flying was the transition of landscape, culture, people, language, cuisine. It made me realise that everything that we have in common is much, much bigger than the relatively small things that separate us. And it was kind of like a kind of terrestrial overview effect. The overview effect is what happens to astronauts when they go up into space and they look down from their space module. And they see this beautiful, fragile, interconnected, vulnerable world. And they have an epiphany. And bearing in mind, these guys are usually hard-bitten former military test pilots. And they go up there and they come back as environmentalists. And they come back as peace advocates because they've changed their perspective. And travelling overland kind of did that for me. And there's one moment I'd like to share with you, just to finish off, is there's this extraordinary place called Anganguea, which is in the Michoacan Mountains in northern Mexico. And it's the overwintering ground of the monarch butterfly. I don't know if you know about the monarch butterfly, but every year, millions of these butterflies gather in this very small patch of pine forest in the mountains. And the trees are literally heavy with butterflies, and they're there for the winter months. And as the sun comes up, they all take to the air and they flutter around you, and it's absolutely extraordinary. But the most amazing thing about these butterflies is they're the world's best travelled insects. They go from Mexico, they travel all the way up through America, right up to Canada, and then they come back to overwinter again the following season. But the extraordinary thing is, the butterflies which come back are the 5th generation of the ones that left. They're the great-great-great-grandchildren of the ones that departed the previous year. That's our journey on climate change. It's an intergenerational journey. It won't be fixed in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes, or even our great-grandchildren's lifetimes. So we have to think like the butterfly about laying the long-term transition foundations, because every single ton of carbon that doesn't go into the atmosphere today alleviates future human suffering. Every tonne makes a difference. Every tonne is powerful. And there's a wonderful moment in the book where Barbara Kingsolver writes his book, Flight Behaviour, which is all about the migration of the butterfly. And there's a kind of classic journalist challenging a climate scientist on the verification, the efficacy of the science. And he just comes back with this brilliant line. He just goes, "We're at the top of Niagara Falls in a canoe. We got here by drifting, but we can't turn around for a lazy paddle back when you finally stop pissing around. We've arrived at the point of an audible roar. Does it strike you as a good time to debate the existence of the falls?" And we're at the point, as we all know, of an audible roar. But I use this metaphor a lot because it works with people who don't engage with the science. They can understand the metaphor. And I think the reason for optimism is this extraordinary emergency calls for an extraordinary emergence. And everyone should ask themselves 3 questions. Who am I? Who are we? Where are we? And if you ask those 3 questions and take them back to their fundamental level, you get a change in philosophy and a change in perspective. Because 40,000 years ago, we came out of Africa and we colonised 5 continents of the planet. Antarctica, probably best to leave that one alone. But we've been planetary in physical form for 40,000 years. It's now time to become planetary in philosophy and planetary in perspective. And as I said, there's a happy coincidence that the tools that we might need to do that, the serendipity we might need to do that, are now in our hands. The great communications thinker Marshall McLuhan, who wrote about the medium is the message in the 60s, when he talked about television as broadcast, as one to many, as control and power. And now, in the era of the internet, the communication is many to many. It's mass engagement, it's mass communication, it's mass responsibility. And that's the way that we will engage with and ultimately change the world, because we are fortunate in that we are the generation that is born into the turning of the page. These are the foundations we lay as we change the world and set ourselves off on our monarch butterfly journey. Thank you.